we need to be maybe putting sales and marketing back together
Mm,
rather than trying to pretend that they're like they have no bearing on each other. Because if the buyer is making decisions much later in the process, they're already hopefully seeing your marketing as one of the influencers in their buying decision.
yeah, I mean, that's a great point, Judith. So two things. If you think, what does marketing do?
Mm.
Um, Marketing sets the stage up front. Why should we engage with this company, right? The
Mm.
other thing that marketing does is, in a lot of cases, they create sales tools.
I create clear thinking and decisive leaders who can amplify their influence. Contact me to find out how I can help you or your organisation.
And today our guest is Greg Nutter. How are you doing, Greg?
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks, Judith.
So, Greg, tell me, do you have a favourite book?
Well, certainly one of my favorites is my own. It's called P3 Selling, the essentials of B2B sales success. But I think over the years, I've had a lot of really inspirational books. Some are in sales, the fundamentals of selling, but I'm a big fan of books that talk about why people do things. So uh, uh, the psychology of why people make changes, make decisions, things like that, because I think that's really critical to understand because um, people use the same kind of behaviors when they make buying decisions. It's important for sellers to have at least a perspective of how people make decisions.
That sounds good. So tell us a little bit more about you then.
Sure. I'm a lifelong salesperson. Started in sales, went into sales management, sales training, was head of sales for some large organizations and some very small organizations. And along the way, I learned two things: what selling really is for me, what it isn't, and I also learned that there's a whole lot of people who, even though they've been in selling for a long time, maybe lack a deep understanding of what it is. How do you pull it off? Uh, Selling is a lot of people think is selling is just getting someone to buy stuff, but I define selling as influence, influencing people's perspectives, influencing people to change their um, situation, to change their behaviors. And not just people with sales in their title need to understand sales. So I went from managing a number of sales teams to consulting. Worked consulted with companies like Microsoft and Hewlett Packard and NCR and Michelin to small companies where I was fractional head of sales.
Brilliant. Thank you. So, as the resident sales expert, then, can you tell us what the common mistakes a B2B company may make in terms of sales?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I get that asked quite a bit. And I kind of really focused on this a few years ago when I started doing a lot of fractional head of sales for smaller companies. I would look at sellers who'd been, everywhere from 6 months into selling to 16 years or 26 years in selling, and they were making the same mistake, and which is why I decided to write my book. So the first three, and you'll identify with this, Judith, and your listeners identify this. It's spending too much time talking about your product,
Mm-hmm.
right? You get a prospecting message, you get an email, you get something on LinkedIn, and someone is like, they're just talking about the product. People don't buy product, particularly in business, right? They buy solutions to problems. And so we spend way too much time focusing on our product and our features and how great our company is, and not enough time about the problems we solve or the opportunities that we provide for companies. So that to me is the biggest. Uh, Secondly, whether people have been trained in it or they just naturally fell into it, but if you believe that selling is about influencing, as I mentioned, influencing perspectives, influencing change, then the best way to influence is not telling. A lot of sellers believe that I just tell you again why my product is so good, why my company is really good, why people are buying this today, that you'll figure it out. Telling is surprisingly ineffective, poorly, to drive, to influence people to change. Instead, it's all about asking, engaging people, getting them to think about why something might be important. And probably the last thing is that sellers are notorious for what I like to say, jumping into a situation and letting the fur, right? It's like,
Mm.
let's get out there and do some selling, right? And it's surprisingly how much more effective they could be if they spend a little time planning. And there's probably 4 or 5 areas that planning is really critical, around prospecting, around planning sales calls or sales interactions, strategizing, sales opportunity, and looking at their pipeline and figuring out how they're going to spend their time. So those are the big 3 I see as sellers. Certainly companies make some mistakes too that I've seen.
Brilliant, thank you. So your book is the P3 Selling, the Essentials of B2B Sales Success.
Yep.
So can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. I've read a lot of sales books. Started at the beginning. A lot of great. Some are just too complicated, and people have a hard time using them in practice. And so over the last, 25 years or so, when I've been coaching people on selling, I was looking for something that was straightforward, intuitive, that people would go, "Yep, I get that." And so I drilled down and I said, there are 3 things that a salesperson needs to focus on, right? With their influence. Where do they need to influence? And those 3 things just happen to start with the letter P. First one is problem. We need to influence people on their perspectives around those problems, why those problems are important, how big they are, why they need to take action on. The second P is around people. Which people have those problems? What are their perspectives of those problems? Do they see other ways of resolving those problems? And how much influence do those people have? Who has more and who has less? And the third P is process. And when you hear process, a lot of sellers will think, sales process. We have a sales process. And that's not what I mean here. I mean a buying decision process. People and companies go through very predictable ways of making buying decisions. And so we need to focus on that buying decision process. How is it happening? Where are we in the buying decision process? How are we positioned? And based on where someone is in a buying decision, that tells us what we should be doing.
Mm.
And so we follow the buying decision and we don't lead with a selling process.
Brilliant, thank you. So I think that's really interesting, Greg, in terms of the P3. What can people do, especially small businesses, really, to enhance their ability to get that right?
I guess a couple things. So, if I take that one step higher and say, okay, so we talked about what some mistakes that salespeople make, and you can take that up to the sales leaders or the companies themselves and say, are they managing with a selling-oriented process or a buying decision process? And then let me explain a little bit what I mean by that. A lot of companies will have a CRM, right? A customer relationship management system, Salesforce or some other HubSpot, something else. And if you look at the various stages that they track, they'll track something like this. It'll say prospect, discovery, presentation, objection handling, propose, close. So if you look at that and say, now, is that what the seller is doing or what the prospect is doing?
Okay.
The seller. And the problem with that is that just because I, the seller, have had a prospecting call or discovery call, it doesn't mean that somebody is in the early stage of buying. They could be just about ready to put out an order for somebody. Or just because I propose doesn't mean they're in the final stage, doesn't mean they've even made a decision to buy anything.
Mm.
So if you just blindly follow a selling process without looking at the buying decision process, you're likely to do the wrong thing at the wrong time. So companies need to put in place a process to manage opportunities that align with what the buyer's doing, not just focus on what the seller is doing. The second thing is, and this is a big one, I've seen this play out a lot, is management involvement and adoption. Too often, I've run training programs for some very large companies, multi-billion-dollar companies, where I meet the sales manager and sales leader, and hey, Greg, great, glad you're here. Here's my team, and he closes the door and walks out. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And sales managers are, or at least not just sales managers, first-line managers are the single greatest point of failure for rolling out almost any program. You've probably seen that, Judith. And so if the sales manager doesn't use the tool, doesn't use the concept, doesn't support them in their own management processes, one-on-ones, joint calls, deal reviews, team meetings, if they aren't expert on the methodology, then it'll fail. And I've seen that all over the place. So they need to consciously use it in almost everything. And a lot of times sales training is for sales reps. And so until it becomes part of the culture, and I even go as far as, if you're looking at small companies, I've worked with some owners, and these owners get it, that they need to be as knowledgeable on the selling process as the sales reps are. Doesn't mean they have to do it. They have to understand it. Selling is way too important to outsource to somebody else and cross your fingers that they're going to bring a deal in. So it's that putting in a good process and making sure that the whole organization understands what it is and follows it.
Thank you for that. I think that's something that you see a lot, especially in larger organizations, where there's not enough understanding on the sales process, or the fact that the sales process is considered that literal one time you're talking to the customer, as opposed to every single interaction with the customer is the sales process.
Yeah. People think selling is prospecting and getting the deal, right? But in between, there's a whole lot of other things where you're influencing. A technical person needs to come in and influence somebody on their recommendation, their point of view, their perspective. And if they're just giving facts and giving information, that's not very powerful when it comes to influencing.
With the sales becoming more complex in this environment, lots of sellers appearing to be similar, lots of people saying the same thing, how can someone navigate so that they can actually sell in this complex sort of world that we're in?
Let me kind of step back a little bit from that question. And you're right, selling is becoming a lot more complex. And here's a couple of reasons. One is a lot of companies are becoming more risk averse, large companies, small companies. And so when they buy something, there's a lot more steps, a lot more decision criteria, fewer exceptions. A deal is being scrutinized much more closely than ever before. That causes a lot more people to be involved in a buying decision.
Right.
10 years ago, there was like 3 or 4. Now there's 15 to 20, even for small companies. And they're coming from different backgrounds. It's not just purchasing and the line managers, all kinds of different people weighing in. IT and compliance and a legal side. Third trend is companies are engaging their sellers later and later in a buying process. In the days of old, a prospect could get needed to talk to a seller to get information on the product. But today they can just Google around on a website, look at analyst reports, talk to their professional network, and they can get almost everything they need. So sellers are being brought in very late in the game, and they have much less opportunity to influence those perspectives.
Let's listen to a quick advert.
The Maverick Paradox. Judith Germain is an author, speaker, consultant, mentor, and trainer, and the leading authority on Maverick leadership. She is the founder of the Maverick Paradox, which supports organizations to enhance their leadership capabilities and to help business owners develop and grow their businesses. Judith enables individuals, business owners, and organizations to improve their impact and influence. She is also HR Zone's leadership columnist, and her expert opinion has appeared in national, international, and trade press.
Welcome back to the Maverick Paradox. This is the podcast for the pathologically curious.
So how do they do that influencing then?
Got it. Right. So, so influencing is about asking questions, good questions. There's lots of research that shows that influencing, asking a question that engages somebody to think is how you go about. There was something I read a long time ago. It said, if you want to get somebody to change, the first thing you have to do is to increase their awareness of their current state, right? So what's their environment like, right? Do they have problems at home, in the office, with something? And it's increasing that awareness gets people to say, you know what? Yeah, this is pretty crummy. I need to do something about it. Telling is surprisingly ineffective at causing people to reflect or to increase their awareness of their current state. But asking certain kinds of questions at certain stages does cause that to happen. And back to what we were saying before, it depends on where they are. Are they in the early stages where they are thinking, should I do have they decided they're going to do something and now they're thinking, what could I do? Are they trying to compare between alternatives? Or are they in a final decision process? So the things that you ask depends greatly on where they are. Right? In early stages, it's all about influencing, should I change or not? Later on, it's influencing what information sources should I use? Then it's what decision criteria should I use? And then lastly, it's maybe what final terms and conditions should I use? So the kind of things you influence changes as somebody goes through 4 or 5 stages of a decision process.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I guess we need to be thinking about sales. I suppose we need to be maybe putting sales and marketing back together rather than trying to pretend that they have no bearing on each other, because if the buyer is making decisions much later in the process, they're already hopefully seeing your marketing as one of the influencers in their buying decision.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, Judith. So 2 things. If you think, what does marketing do? Marketing sets the stage up front for why should somebody reach out to you. Website, webinars, messaging. Why should we engage with this company, right? The other thing that marketing does is, a lot of cases, they create sales tools for sales reps. So I see 2 major disconnects. One is a lot of the marketing materials are way too product focused. I was out talking to a company that makes robotic equipment not long ago, and their marketing guy was there. And said, here's our brochure about how great our product is. I said, no, change that. Tell them what problems you solve. Tell them what opportunities you create. So theirs was around, hey, we solve labor issues. We make it easier for you to get your jobs done without worrying about somebody showing up on time or somebody quitting or hiring, right? So those are the problems we solve. So the message needs to be more about solving problems and opportunities. The second gap when it comes to, and I experienced this a long, long time ago when I worked with Xerox, if you look at the materials that marketing creates, many of them are, some of them are front end, but a lot of them are late stage, which are product spec, right? And why our company is great, why an analyst company said that, you should consider us. Those are late stage resources. Sellers struggle with that initial, I'll talk to you, that prospecting stage. And so they need more tools in that early stage. The should I fix something? What resources should I use to decide? Things like that. They need more tools in that stage to help the sellers rather than, okay, I've decided I want to know more about your product. That happens a long way down.
Yeah. And also, I suppose a common mistake that people can make, whether they're a inside small business or a large business, is starting the closing conversation too early.
Yes. Well, that's kind of exactly what I was saying earlier. In fact, in our book, I provide two tables. One that says if your prospect is doing, thinking these things, then you're in this state, right? And so, and the second table says if you're in this stage, this is what you should be doing. And too often somebody says, well, I've done the discovery call and done the demo. Now's the time for the proposal. When somebody hasn't decided to make a change decision yet. So that's where you need to go back and say, what are they doing? You know what? They haven't decided to even consider making a change. Why would I give them a proposal? Why would I ask for the order? Right? I need to go back, spend more time trying to influence them on the need to change, the importance of change, the impact if I don't change. Right? So watching what prospect is doing tells you what you should be doing.
That's what I like that.
Right.
It's like mirroring where you need to be. I suppose the other mistake, and it certainly happened to me when I've been the customer, I've been in a situation where you basically got your money out in your hand and you're ready to buy, and then the seller convinces you out of buying. So they completely oversell. And I remember talking to someone, and I literally said, you need to stop talking now because I want to buy. And they carried on and carried on and carried on. And then when they asked for the sale, I'm like, I'm not really interested anymore, because it was like they refused to let me buy what I wanted to buy. They wanted to keep selling.
Because they weren't listening to where you were in your buying process. They were too focused on their selling process.
Yeah.
It's like all of a sudden you're ready to buy. You've got your pen on a piece of paper and someone says, oh, we've got a neat new product coming out next week. Would you like me to tell you about that? And someone says, they put the pen down and sure. So if they're not picking up and looking for where you are, then they do the wrong thing. Right. And, and I see that, we talked about this earlier in the way companies manage their pipeline, their opportunity pipeline. Something's in a late stage. And so the sales manager or sales leader says, oh, well, then you need to be closing. Instead of saying, well, what has the prospect done lately? What's their thinking? What activities are they looking for information? Are they bringing in other vendors? Or are they just trying to do some cost analysis, right? So what are they doing? And that tells you where they are, and that therefore tells you what you should be doing.
Do you think that sales targets is what's the cause of this?
No, I think having sales targets is reasonable. Companies need to keep the lights on. They need to grow their business. They need to return money to shareholders. So the sales targets are important. Sales targets need to be reasonable, right? But the mistake we make is that sometimes we see, we see a deal that the sales rep says, well, I've done all those stuff. The sales manager said, well, then you just need to close it, right? Close it. I've argued with a couple of consultants who work for, a large CRM company, Salesforce, for example, who again, they put in the pipeline stages that tell you what the sales rep is doing. And I said, no, that's all wrong. You need to put in the pipeline what the prospect is doing. right? Otherwise, you get into the situation where you're trying to close a deal where someone hasn't decided to do anything. You're dead on there. And so it's this misunderstanding. If you really knew where deals were, if you said, you know what, I've got all these deals in the front end and nothing's close to closing, then a manager would know that they need to do different things. And instead of telling their sales reps close, they need to tell their sales reps, well, how do I move this from they're not interested in doing anything to, hey, they might consider it. And the activities are very different. And so not having the right process in place results in managers giving sales reps the wrong advice on what to do next.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So, what made you decide to write your book?
I saw too many people doing, just like you, Judith, with your book. You probably saw a lot of people doing the wrong things and the wrong times, and said, "Hey, I'm going to write this down, and next time I see it, I'm just going to say, read my book." So, and I worked for, probably one of the largest sales training companies in the world. What I found is that people are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on sales training, sometimes millions. And it wasn't really moving the needle. I mean, people were still doing the same silly things. They were not following the processes. So I thought it's complicated. It doesn't resonate with people. And I went on a conquest to try and fix it. So I wrote down what I thought was the right way to sell, following a process. Selling is very much a process. It's not it maybe has some art form to it, but largely people that do really well follow a process, and very prescriptive of what do you do at each stage, why you don't do something, why you should do more of something. And I hope that, we sold into the thousands of books, 18, 19 different countries. Saw a lot in the United Kingdom, actually, and Germany. Wanted something that people, it would resonate with them, and they say, yeah, if I follow this, I can be a better seller.
Brilliant. So, Greg, before we end, is there something that I should have asked you, but I didn't? And you're like, oh man, I really wanted to answer that. Because if so, what is it?
Maybe two things. One is, we hear a lot about AI lately, right?
Yeah.
It's either going to make it's the best thing for everybody, or it's going to end civilization as we know it, right? And I think it's somewhere in between. I think from a sales standpoint, and even marketing standpoint, it'll provide a lot of productivity to some people in certain ways, also displace a lot of jobs. There was a research report a few years back by a company called Forrester Research, and the report was called Death of the B2B Salesman. And it focused on the decline of sales positions due to the growth of e-com. Well, now that AI is on the scene, I think it's going to pick up even more. Sellers who can only talk about their product and their company will be displaced. AI can do a far better job for far less money than salespeople. But sellers who focus on two things, one is talking about problems and opportunities, not their product. And secondly, focus on the buying decision process and helping companies navigate that. Those jobs aren't going away, and they're going to get paid a lot more because there'll be money freed up from the people who only talk about their product. So that's an area where I strongly suggest consultants, salespeople, sales leaders invest in if they want to remain relevant in the coming years.
So the devil advocate in me says, surely with enough data, and data's becoming easier to transcribe and put out there, could not an AI do just that very thing?
Perhaps, but I think, you look at what AI isn't really good at now AI is really good at giving information.
Mm.
But part of remember I talked about, you got to understand where your prospect is.
Yeah.
And some of that is they tell you. Some of that is body language. Some of that is intuition.
Mm.
And those things AI is not really good at today. So it's being able to look at a prospect and say, where are they? What are their hopes? What are their fears? Some of those you're going to guess at. Some you'll observe. And it's that kind of intuition, that empathy, that I don't think an AI is there to do. And that's what allows a salesperson actually to understand where somebody is, understand hesitancies of why someone maybe doesn't want to move forward, more effectively than a computer.
Well, that's a relief.
Relief for all of us. Some of us.
Yeah. At least for now. At least for now. Brilliant.
Yes.
Greg, you've been great. Thank you for coming on the show.
Judith, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And thank you out there for tuning in to the Maverick Paradox podcast. I am Judith Germain, your host, and I hope you've enjoyed listening to today's conversation.
The Maverick Paradox Magazine. The Maverick Paradox Magazine is for the pathologically curious. Written by a swagger of socialized mavericks who are divergent thinkers, the magazine tackles the biggest issues affecting maverick leaders today. You might be a business owner or a leader within an organization who wants to have your thinking challenged, to be exposed to a diversity of thought, or to learn from diverse experts in their fields. If so, the Maverick Paradox Magazine is for you. Join the swagger at themaverickparadox.com and engage in the conversation.